Welcome to HFY Stories. Please subscribe to the channel. Your one click means the world to me. He hadn't drawn his sidearm in 40 years of active command. Not once. Not even against war fleets 3 times his tonnage. His hand found the grip anyway, in his own detention bay, because a lieutenant with pale scales had just told him something in the human woman's chemistry his instruments should never have picked up. Not fear of the crew holding her captive, but fear for them. That was where it started to come apart for General Cororax, not with the woman herself, but with the moment he realized his own officer couldn't stop thinking about her. 6 hours earlier, he'd had her dragged off a smuggling vessel his sensors swore was carrying weapons-grade plutonium. 6 hours earlier, he'd believed the hardest part of his day would be making a masked prisoner talk. She hadn't stopped talking since. That was the problem. It was a sandwich, she told him, arms folded, legs crossed on the cold deck plating like she'd chosen to sit there. Tuna, 3 days old, no refrigeration. Congratulations, General, your scanners flagged my lunch as a biological weapon. Cororax had crushed empires with a gesture. He was not accustomed to prisoners who laughed at him. You will remove the mask, he said, and his voice shook the walls the way it always did, the way that had ended negotiations on 17 worlds before they began. She didn't blink, not that he could tell, only her mouth and chin showed beneath the black fabric, and right now that mouth was amused. Not going to happen, she said, easy as breathing. And not for my sake either, for everyone else's. He told her what he thought of her defiance. She told him his battle cruiser listed to starboard, 0.3 degrees, she guessed, from an uneven load, and that somewhere in deck plating near frame 12 there was a cost-cutting weld that shouldn't exist. It did exist. Only he and his chief engineer knew where. Lucky guess, he said, and heard how thin it sounded. Or I pay attention, she said, comes with what I am. Her name, she finally gave him, was Maya Tors, captain once of a ship that no longer existed. And when he pressed her, when his instincts told him this calm was a weapon in itself, she gave him something stranger than a confession. You know the old story, she said, about a box that was never supposed to be opened. Everyone remembers what got out. Nobody remembers what stayed in. She let that sit. Somebody built a box like that out of a person, General, and what's inside it? He wanted it to be theatre. He'd interrogated liars skilled enough to weep on command, and none of them had ever made his chest go tight the way her stillness did. 50 years ago, she said, my people wanted the perfect soldier, not stronger, not faster. They wanted someone soldiers would die for on sight, so they built one, wired her to be believed, wired her to be loved. Her voice dropped, and something genuinely bitter moved under it. It worked too well. The first test, half the research team tried to murder the other half to prove their devotion. 3 governments fell inside a year, replaced by people who wanted only to bring me home and put a crown on it. And the mask slows it down, doesn't stop it. She touched the edge of it with one finger, absent like touching a scar. Bare face, direct look, it's instant, permanent, doesn't matter what you are. Human, Valdorian, machine mind, something in what they did to me doesn't care about species. He called for his science officer, Lieutenant Vex, and sent him to dig through classified Earth archives while he tried to convince himself this was elaborate theatre and nothing more. Vex came back pale-scaled and grim. A program, real, codenamed for the same myth she'd invoked, terminated decades ago after a containment failure that read, in the sanitized military language, like 47 deaths that were never technically murders. The subject had vanished. So had the officers sent to hunt her. They didn't vanish, Maya said quietly when Vex reported it aloud. They joined me. Nobody ever chooses that. It happens to them anyway, a little more every day they think about me. Vex's throat pouch flared pale green, a species tell for something between fear and awe. Sir, he said slowly, the chemical signature isn't lying. Confidence, grief, dominance, protection, all stacked on top of each other. And underneath all of it fear, not of us, for us. Cororax's hand had gone to his sidearm without his permission. He made himself let go of it. He wanted a flaw in her story badly enough that he almost missed the deeper wrongness settling into the room. Not that she might be lying, but that everything in him wanted to believe her, and he could no longer tell whether that want was his own. He was still turning that over, still hunting for the seam where her story would tear, when the comm chimed with a priority signal that made even Vex go rigid. Admiral Thex, demanding immediate transfer of the prisoner to council custody. The wall display resolved into 6 pale eyes, and Cororax watched every one of them fix on the woman standing at his shoulder, and watched the Admiral's famous iron composure simply dissolve. "Captain Tors," Thex said, and there was no command left in it, only something close to longing. "I wondered if we'd cross paths again." 15 years, Maya said gently, like she was reminding an old friend of an anniversary. "You remember the room. You remember what I was wearing. Tell me, Admiral, how many 5-minute meetings do you replay every single day?" The Admiral didn't answer. He didn't need to. His mouth worked once, twice, no sound coming, and his hand rose halfway to the screen as if he could touch her through it before he caught himself and forced it back down to his side. The bridge behind him had gone utterly silent. Whoever was crewing that command deck had stopped pretending not to watch. "Every day," Thex finally said, and his voice had none of the 6-star weight it was supposed to carry. "Every single day since." Cororax felt the floor of his certainty give way entirely. "You're compromised," he said to the screen, and heard his own voice crack on it. "The facility waiting for her isn't built to hold her," Maya said, not to Thex now but to Cororax, quiet and terribly patient. "It's built to study her. Do you understand what that means? Every scientist who gets close, every guard who walks her cell, every one of them starts carrying it home, to colleagues, to families, to governments." She let the silence stretch until he filled it himself. "Millions," Vex said, his voice barely there. "Billions, eventually." "Once I'm in council hands," Maya said, "there's no version of this where anyone's will is still their own, including yours, General, eventually, mask or not." The transmission cut before Thex could recover enough authority to argue with himself out loud. What came through instead, minutes later, was a single line on a private channel. "Delay the transfer, sitecom failure. I will explain when I can look at something other than her face." Cororax read it twice and understood he was watching a man, 3 ranks above him, quietly commit the same crime he was about to commit himself. He looked at Maya. She wasn't smiling now. She was watching him the way a person watches a door they cannot open themselves. "I won't make you choose," she said. "I won't tip it. If you hand me over, I'll go quietly, and you'll have followed every order you ever swore to follow, and I won't hold it against you." Her hand rested on the frame of her own cell, not gripping it, just resting, like she already suspected which way this would go, and was leaving him room to arrive there on his own legs. "The second I start forcing choices instead of asking them, I've become exactly what they built. I'd rather run forever than be that." He thought about the 17 systems he'd bent to the Union's will, about how many of those victories had needed nothing but his voice and his reputation, and never a shot fired. He thought about a woman who could have owned this entire ship in an afternoon and had instead spent 6 hours arguing herself out of using what she had. "Vex," he said, "how fast can you have a courier prepped?" 20 minutes, sir." The lieutenant's throat pouch had gone the pale, hopeful green Cororax had never once seen on him in 3 years of service. "Do it, quietly." The 20 minutes felt longer than the 6 hours before them. Cororax walked her down through 2 decks himself, past crew who didn't know enough to salute the masked prisoner and did anyway, some instinct in them reaching for her without orders. At the umbilical to the courier bay, the air recyclers running loud enough to cover most conversation, she stopped. "You'd have made this call without me pushing at all," she said. "I can tell the difference between a man moved and a man who moves himself. That's rarer than you'd think." "How do you know which one I am?" "Because you're still asking me whether I made you do it." The mouth beneath the mask curved, unguarded for the first time since he'd taken her off that ship. Men who need to ask are usually the ones telling the truth. The umbilical hissed open. She stepped through it, paused with one hand on the frame, and looked back at him, not at the crew, not at Vex, just at him. "Find me a war worth fighting, General," she said. "I hear you're good at that." Then the hatch sealed, and the courier's drive lit the launch bay in a wash of white, and General Kororax stood watching a small ship carry the most dangerous woman in the galaxy back out into the dark, taking with her a war no fleet could ever fight for her. He didn't move until the drive flare had shrunk to a single point among the stars, and then to nothing at all, and even then he stood a moment longer, wondering how a face he had never once seen had managed, in 20 minutes, to change his.